Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein is one of those films that reminds you why this story refuses to die. Ever since Mary Shelley first sent Victor Frankenstein and his creature shambling into the cultural bloodstream in 1818, filmmakers have been carving their own versions out of a novel, from Universal's bolt-necked icon to countless reimaginings. Del Toro arrives very late to that party, with a project he's been trying to make in one form or another for over a decade. It isn't faithful in a literal chapter-by-chapter way, yet what he's delivered is one of the richest, most emotionally coherent versions the story has ever had on screen. Set within a grim, winter-soaked Europe and powered by Netflix and Del Toro's lifelong obsession with monsters, the film reshapes Shelley's narrative into something intimate and operatic. At the center of it all is a simple, brutal story. A damaged man decides that his pain entitles him to godhood, and his creation is forced to pay the price. Oscar Isaac plays Victor Frankenstein, not as a cackling mad scientist, but as a deeply damaged, narcissistic man whose genius is inseparable from his cruelty. Jacob Elordi's creature is not a mute brute, but the emotional center of the film, a figure of pain, confusion, and moral clarity who sees, more clearly than his maker, what happens when life is created without compassion. Around them orbit Mia Goth's Claire and Elizabeth and a supporting cast packed with heavyweights like Christoph Waltz and Charles Dance, all feeding into a story that's as much about fathers, sons, and inherited malice as it is about science gone wrong.
50% of the work with actors is the casting them. And I always say, and I mean it, I cast eyes. The eyes of the actor is what makes the character. In order to know that Victor is a genius and he thinks he's doing good and he's driven, you need Oscar's eyes. In order for the creature to have innocence, you need Jacob's eyes. In order to understand that she understands the designs of God, you need Mia's eyes.
The key thing to understand is that Del Toro is not trying to give you the book. He moves scenes, condenses, changes, removes, and even adds new characters and bends events. The film leans hard into ideas that have always been present in Shelley: creation without care, the horror of abandonment, the moral responsibility of the maker, but filters them through Del Toro's sensibilities: Catholic guilt, cycles of abuse, and the transformative power of trauma. His Frankenstein is as much a story about fathers who should never have had children as it is about blasphemy against God and the natural order. That isn't pure transcription of the novel, but it is absolutely true to its spirit. Formally, the film is doing something quite different from most previous adaptations, which tend to decide early on whether this is Victor's story or the creature's. Del Toro instead lets the film oscillate between the two perspectives: the arrogant man who believes he can dominate nature, and the abandoned being who has to live with the consequences of that belief. The creature emerges as the moral core of the film, the character who actually grapples with what it means to exist in a world without love, justice, or a place to belong. That gives the film a beating heart that many previous versions never quite found.
Mary was brought up by her parents to believe that all children must be loved and cherished, that the powerful must care for the weak. In this, the key moment of the book, Frankenstein's rejection of his creation is against love and reason. He comes into the world an innocent. At first, Mary describes him as a creature, not a monster. It is loneliness and suffering which makes him wicked.
This is a world where churches and laboratories feel weirdly alike. All of this is wrapped in some of the most assured craftsmanship of Del Toro's career. The production design, the makeup, the physicality of Elordi's performance, the way Victor's world decays visually as his moral universe collapses. These aren't just pretty flourishes. They're the visual grammar of the film's ideas. Hey guys, what's happening? Niyat here with Film Comics Explained, and today we're going through Mary Shelley's history and the creation of her seminal novel, as well as explaining the story, characters, and themes in both the novel and movie. We'll also talk about where it diverges from Mary Shelley's original story. Don't forget to hit subscribe and the notification icon to stay up to date on all the latest content here, and click the like button to help appease the algorithm gods. Also, if you'd like to make a suggestion on what you want me to cover next, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments below.
No, I think the book was responding to many things, including the fact that Doom was such a worthy thing to tackle in an era that was talking about the age of reason and in the beginnings of industrialization, the beginnings of modernity, you know? And they said, what if we lose? What if we all lose? That was a very romantic notion. Now I think that, for me, the urgent message is, what if we could all forgive each other into existing? What if we could all be flawed? What if we could all allow everybody to be flawed?
Mary Shelley is one of those rare writers whose life story feels almost as uncanny and turbulent as the fiction she created. Long before anyone coined the term science fiction, she'd already written one of its foundational texts, Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus, in 1818, a novel that fused Gothic horror, romantic philosophy, early science, and raw personal experience into something electrifying. To understand what Frankenstein means and why it still matters, it helps to see where it came from. A young woman shaped by radical parents, early bereavement, scandal, exile, and an almost relentless series of losses. Mary Shelley was born Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin in London on the 30th of August 1797. She was the daughter of two of the most radical thinkers in Britain, the political philosopher and novelist William Godwin and the pioneering feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, author of A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. Her life began under the shadow of death and ideology. Her mother died just 11 days after Mary's birth due to complications from childbirth. Mary grew up not knowing her mother, but surrounded by her writings and by her father's idealized and very public portrait of Wollstonecraft. Godwin later published a memoir of his wife, which frankly documented Wollstonecraft's love affairs and illegitimate child. The book was meant as a tribute, but in conservative Britain it scandalized readers, and Mary grew up with the knowledge that her mother had been both brilliant and socially condemned. Godwin raised Mary in an intellectually rich but emotionally complicated household. Radical writers, philosophers, and political figures came and went. Mary had access to her parents' books and ideas and was encouraged to read widely. She absorbed Enlightenment rationalism, radical politics, and romantic literature at the same time. But her childhood was not idyllic. When she was 4, Godwin remarried Mary Jane Clairmont, creating a blended household with a few step-siblings, including Claire Clairmont, who would later become central to Mary's adult life. Mary's relationship with her stepmother was strained, and she often felt like an outsider inside her own home. From early on, Mary lived with a contradiction. She was the daughter of a feminist icon and a radical philosopher. Yet as a girl in early 19th century Britain, she had limited formal education and social freedom. That tension between lofty ideals and painful reality is all over Frankenstein. In 1814, when Mary was 16, she met the young romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley, one of her father's followers and admirers. Shelley was brilliant, intense, idealistic, and already married, but the two began meeting secretly, often at her mother's grave in St. Pancras churchyard, and fell in love. When Mary and Percy eventually eloped to Europe, bringing Claire Clairmont with them, this was scandalous. Mary's father was furious and refused to see them, and so the young couple spent months traveling through France and Switzerland, often broke, socially ostracized, and dogged by gossip. Mary returned to England pregnant, and over the next few years, she and Percy endured a string of hardships, unstable finances, legal troubles, and repeated personal tragedies, including the deaths of several of their children in infancy or early childhood. These losses left a deep mark. Mary knew what it was to give birth and then watch a child die. She also carried the knowledge that her own birth had killed her mother. This is why so many argue that Frankenstein is, among other things, a birth myth, a way for Mary to work through grief and guilt around motherhood, creation, and loss. The origin story of Frankenstein begins in 1816, during the so-called Year Without a Summer, after the volcanic dust from Mount Tambora in Indonesia dimmed the sun and produced eerie, unseasonal weather in Europe. Mary, then still married Godwin, Percy Shelley, and Claire Clairmont travelled to Geneva, where they became neighbours and frequent companions of Lord Byron and his doctor, John Polidori, at the Villa Diodati. The group spent rainy days and nights reading German ghost stories, talking about philosophy, science, and the nature of life and death. One night, Byron proposed a challenge. Each of them should write a ghost story. Polidori eventually wrote The Vampire, a key ancestor of the modern vampire tale. Mary, after struggling at first to think of a story, had what she later described as a waking dream, a vision of a pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together, seeing it stir and open its dull yellow eye. That image became the seed of Frankenstein. She began drafting the story that summer and continued working on it over the next 2 years amid more upheaval. By the time Frankenstein was published in 1818, she was only 20. The ghost story contest isn't the whole picture though. Mary's imagination was also shaped by intensely personal events. The suicides of her half-sister, Fanny Imlay, and Percy's first wife, Harriet, in late 1816, as well as the constant undercurrents of shame, grief, and social hostility that surrounded their circle. Those tragedies, two women whose lives ended in despair and scandal, deepen the novel's themes of loneliness, rejection, and the destructive weight of responsibility. Structurally, Frankenstein is a story nested inside a story, nested inside another story, a design that mirrors its obsession with perspective and responsibility. It opens not with Victor, but with the letters of Robert Walton, an ambitious sea captain exploring the Arctic. Walton writes to his sister in England about his desire to achieve something great, to tread a land never before imprinted by the foot of man. He is, in many ways, a mirror for Victor, another man who yearns to push beyond the limits of human knowledge and glory in the achievement. When his ship becomes trapped in the ice and he and his crew spot a half-mad figure pursuing a gigantic form across the frozen waste, Walton draws the stranger aboard, and the stranger begins to tell his story. This stranger is Victor Frankenstein, and the bulk of the novel is his confession. He describes an idyllic childhood in Geneva, an early fascination with natural philosophy, and his growing obsession with the principle of life. At university in Ingolstadt, he throws himself into study, isolates himself from his family, and eventually discovers, or believes he discovers, the secret that separates the living from the dead. Mary is deliberately vague about the technical details. What matters is not the mechanics of reanimation, but Victor's mindset, his intoxication with the idea that he can pour a torrent of light into our dark world, and his blindness to the ethical questions that might come afterwards. The crucial moment is not the successful experiment, it is the instant after. Victor pieces together a body from stolen corpses, works feverishly through nights of storms, and finally succeeds in making it live. As soon as it breathes and opens its eye, everything collapses. Repulsed by the creature's appearance, Victor panics and flees, abandoning his creation in the same room where it was born. That is the original sin of the book, not the act of creating life, but the refusal to take responsibility for it. When Victor returns, the creature is gone, and he chooses not to speak of what he's done, not to search for it, not to admit his experiment to anyone. He simply tries to resume his old life, as if the problem will go away on its own. The narrative then shifts into yet another embedded story, this time from the creature's perspective. It's easy to forget how radical this turn is. The being we have so far only known as a horror, a shambling, silent threat glimpsed at a distance, is suddenly given a voice. After finding Victor, he recounts his first days of existence, the confusion, the cold, the fear of light and sound. He describes hiding near a remote cottage and secretly observing the de Lacy family, learning language and human customs by watching them, helping them in small, unseen ways, and building up a hopeful fantasy in which he might be accepted by their blind father. It is only when he finally reveals himself that the dream collapses. The sight of him provokes terror, and he's beaten and driven away. What Mary Shelley does here is crucial to what Frankenstein is about. The creature is not innately vicious. He begins as a blank slate, hungry for connection. It is repeated rejection by Victor, by the villagers who attack him, by the family he tries to befriend, that turns his hurt into rage. When he rescues a girl from drowning and is shot for his trouble, it seals his belief that the world will never see him as anything but a monster. His demand that Victor make him a companion is not a demand for an accomplice in evil. It is a plea not to be alone. Victor's refusal, and his horror at the idea of a race of devils, is what pushes the creature fully into vengeful violence. By the time the narrative returns to Victor, the cycle is locked in. The creature promises to be with him on his wedding night. Victor reads this as a threat to himself, not to his future wife Elizabeth. When Elizabeth is murdered, when his young brother William and friend Henry Clerval die, Victor sees only the creature's malice, not the chain of decisions and abandonments that led him there. He pursues his creation across continents and finally into the Arctic, trying to destroy the thing he made. Walton's frame narrative then tightens around them. He listens, is horrified, and has to decide whether to follow Victor's path of obsessive pursuit or to turn back to save his crew. All of this plot machinery, Walton's voyage, Victor's studies, the murders, the chase, serves the deeper questions Mary Shelley is unraveling. The genesis of the novel and that ghost story contest gives it its Gothic mood and some of its most famous imagery. Graveyards, lightning storms, the workshop of filthy creation. The scientific debates of her time lend it the speculative backbone that lets people call it an early work of science fiction, but the emotional voltage comes from something more intimate. Her own experience with birth and death, with absent or failing parents, with brilliant men whose ideals left bodies in their wake. As a result, Frankenstein becomes more than a cautionary tale about mad science. It is a meditation on creation and responsibility. Victor wants the godlike thrill of animating dead flesh, but he recoils from the ongoing, humble work of caring for what he's made. He grasps at the Promethean flame and then drops it the second the consequences become messy. In that sense, the novel can be read as Shelley's answer to the culture of romantic genius that surrounded her, a culture in which people like Percy Shelley, Byron, and even herself pursue their desires and ideas with ferocious intensity, while others often bore the cost. At the same time, the creature's journey makes the book a study of alienation. He is hideous to look at, but internally, he is the most keenly feeling character on the page. He reads Paradise Lost, Plutarch's Lives and the Sorrows of Young Werther, and sees himself in outcasts and rebels. He asks innocent questions about justice, compassion, and God that the novel never fully answers. His violence is horrifying, but the book never lets us forget why he's angry. The way the book came into being, the storm-darkened villa, the scientific speculation, the personal losses pressing in on Mary from every side, echoes through every choice she makes in the story. The nested narratives mirror the way responsibility is passed around and denied. The vague description of Victor's method keeps the focus not on the laboratory trickery, but on his moral failure. The Arctic frame, with Walton forced to choose between glory and the lives of his crew, lets the novel end on a note of chastened humility rather than simple annihilation. Walton, unlike Victor, listens. He turns back. The lesson is not that we must never seek knowledge, but that the quest for knowledge without compassion, without community, and without accountability will destroy both the seeker and the people around them. After Frankenstein, Mary continued to write novels, short stories, travel books, and essays, though none achieved the same iconic status. She lived for years in Italy with her partner Percy and their circle of expatriates, a period marked by intense creativity, but also more loss. 2 more children died there, and in 1822, Percy drowned in a sailing accident off the Italian coast. Widowed at 24, Mary returned to England with her surviving son, Percy Florence Shelley, and supported herself by writing and by carefully editing and promoting Percy's poetry and prose, which were controversial in their own time. In doing so, she both helped shape his reputation and, in a sense, eradicated parts of herself, a dynamic that mirrors the way Frankenstein long overshadowed her other work.
Mary dared to write about bringing the dead back to life, but she learnt the very hardest way that death is final.
She died in London in 1851, aged 53, likely from a brain tumour. Today, though, Mary Shelley is recognized as a major romantic writer and a pioneer of science fiction. So when we talk about what Frankenstein is about, the answer is always plural. It is about a young woman in exile trying to process grief, guilt, and the consequences of unhallowed choices. It is about the seduction of power in an era when science was beginning to seem almost magical. It is about the longing to be loved when you've been made and then abandoned. And it is about the moment after creation, that split second where you have to decide whether you will claim what you've brought into the world or run from it. All of these strands, personal, philosophical, scientific, Gothic, are braided together in the way the book was born and in the story it tells. That is why Frankenstein still feels alive 2 centuries later. It is not just a tale about a monster in a laboratory. It is the record of a mind thinking through, in narrative form, what it means to be a creator, and what monstrous things can happen when the work of care is treated as optional.
Mary's life was unimaginably hard now. Too much death, too young. Some people noticed that she was becoming cold and unfeeling. Was she, like Frankenstein's creature, being hardened by suffering? The monster's words could describe Mary herself.
I am the fallen angel. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend.
Frankenstein, for all its horror, was a story born of youth and vitality. Mary went on to write other books, but none haunts the imagination like Frankenstein. This young woman, at the peak and fire of her youth, dared to break convention by writing a book that would strike fear into the heart.
I lived with Mary Shelley's creation all of my life. For me, it's the Bible, and the movies weigh very heavily on my soul, but I wanted to make it my own, and it became a story about what it is to become a father after being a son and how you carry the weight of what was done to you in your soul, and it necessitates a pure soul to break the cycle.
Del Toro's film opens in 1857 at the end of the world and plants us in the farthermost reaches of the north. A Danish expedition vessel, the Horizon, groaning and trapped in frozen ocean, becomes our first laboratory, a cramped, creaking space where ambition has outrun wisdom. Captain Anderson, played with weary resolve by Lars Mikkelsen, is introduced as a man whose body understands the cold, but whose ego refuses to bend to it. The ice has seized his ship, the crew's morale is sub-zero, and any sane sailor would admit the voyage to the North Pole is a failure. Anderson, of course, insists on pressing on, which is Del Toro's first quiet nod to Robert Walton in the novel. Here, that same archetype is repackaged as a Danish sea captain, less romantic poet sending letters to his sister, more pragmatic commander. But the core is the same, a man willing to risk lives in order to chart the blank spaces on the map.
Vi har påtaget os et værv, og vi vil fuldføre det. Vi skal nå frem til Nordpolen.
Into this frozen stalemate stumbles the past. The crew spot a man on the ice, Baron Victor Frankenstein, played by Oscar Isaac, half dead and shredded by his own story. The film does not soft-pedal his condition. He isn't a brooding, Byronic hero leaning artfully on a rock, but a wreck. Dragged aboard, severely wounded and half delirious, he already looks like the survivor of something far worse than the elements. This is another deliberate echo of Shelley, with a twist. In the novel, Walton's men haul a mysterious stranger onto their ship and only later learn his name. Del Toro similarly lets Victor arrive as an enigma, but the staging is more immediate and brutal. We don't get the gentle build of Walton's letters. We get a bleeding nobleman collapse on the deck of a ship that's already in trouble.
Victor!
The film doesn't waste any time before making the monster more than a distant rumor. As Anderson's men are still trying to process this ragged baron they fished from the ice, the ship itself comes under attack from something even more improbable, a gigantic figure striding across the frozen ocean. Jacob Elordi's creature does not make a tentative, shadowy entrance. He announces himself as a force of nature, a literal giant on the horizon. The crew's response is exactly what you'd expect from men trained to deal with storms and hostile waters, not mythological intruders. They try to fight it. Guns are drawn, a perimeter is formed, and for a moment the film allows us to pretend this can still be handled with the familiar tools of human violence. The attack that follows is an autopsy on human arrogance as the creature's brute strength makes a mockery of their rifles and courage. In a flurry of movement that the film lingers on just long enough to register as slaughter, 6 men are killed. It's an important tonal choice. The first real encounter with the creature is not filtered through Victor's memory, nor is it cut away from. The audience is forced to watch what creation looks like when it comes back to visit the rest of the species. It also quietly inverts the usual dynamic of the scene from the book. In Shelley, the first time Walton's men glimpse the creature, he's a distant, almost spectral figure on a sledge, far away on the ice, an omen, not an immediate threat. Del Toro collapses that distance. His creature doesn't haunt the horizon, he boards the damn ship.
Bring him to me!
The boarding itself is staged like a naval invasion. The creature manages to climb onto the deck, but while its physical superiority is obvious, the sailors are not entirely helpless. They force him back over the side using a blunderbuss and turn the environment itself into a weapon. The captain shoots at the ice, fracturing the surface so that it gives way beneath him, and the creature sinks into the freezing black beneath. It's a crude inversion of Victor's original sin. Victor once defied nature to haul a body up from the darkness into life. These men now use nature to drag that body back down. Of course, anyone even passingly familiar with either the Frankenstein myth or Del Toro's filmography knows this is far too early in the runtime for a definitive victory. The sequence is less about defeating the creature, and more about establishing the stakes and scale. 6 men dead in minutes, a monster too powerful for a heavily armed crew to contain, and an icy wilderness that could swallow anything without a trace. The prologue underlines how small and fragile the human players really are before we've even had a chance to know their names. Thematically, it's already laying down the film's central argument. Humans like to imagine themselves in control, but there are things larger and less manageable than they believe.
No one can conquer death.
I will. I will conquer it.
With the immediate crisis contained, or rather temporarily submerged, the narrative contracts back to the cabin. Captain Anderson brings Victor into his quarters to tend to his wounds. The dynamic between them is crucial. Anderson is the rational man trying to maintain order. Victor is the disordered man whose rationality went too far. The captain wants answers. What was that thing? Who created it? And why was it pursuing this Baron? Victor, ravaged in body and conscience, finally articulates that the creature is his own making.
I did. I made him.
That admission is the hinge of the entire prelude. It transforms the story we've been watching from a straightforward survival scenario into a confession. They have been bordered not just by a wounded stranger, but by the consequences of his actions. Victor declaring the creature his creation is the film's way of formalizing what Shelley's structure does more slowly through nested narratives. It makes clear that the real story is not about a random monster attack in the Arctic, but about how that monster came to exist. The camera, the plot, and our sympathy all pivot away from Anderson's immediate problem and toward Victor's longer, more terrible tale.
It will come back and kill many more unless you deliver me to it.
This is also where the movie makes its clearest structural break from the novel, while still paying homage to it. In Shelley, we reach Victor's story through Walton's letters. The expedition, the letters, and the mysterious stranger are all built in an epistolary frame that emphasizes distance, hearsay, and the unreliability of narrators. Del Toro keeps the outer shell, a stranded polar expedition and a captain eager for knowledge, but alters the delivery. There are no letters, no leisurely correspondence back to England. Instead, we get a direct face-to-face recounting, compressed into scenes of Victor literally bleeding a story out on a stranger's bunk. The effect is more cinematic and immediate, but it subtly shifts the dynamic. Instead of being filtered through Walton's romanticized worship of Victor, the tale is anchored by Anderson's more skeptical, grounded presence. The captain isn't a disciple, he's a stand-in for us.
It is dead. No, it is not! It cannot die.
When Victor begins to tell Anderson what brought him to this point, the film is essentially pulling the same move as the novel, sliding from the outer frame into the long flashback that will fill most of the runtime, but the tonal emphasis is different. Shelley's Victor presents his story as a tragic warning to Walton, a moral lesson for another overreaching man. Del Toro's Victor carries the same weight of caution, but the prologue has already colored him in more damning shades. We have seen the creature he made as a titan smashing men apart on the ice, so when he begins to narrate, the film has stacked the deck against him. His words will be read against the images we've already seen, and that tension between the way Victor will justify himself and the visible carnage his work has caused becomes one of the central currents of the film. The rest of the movie will be his attempt to explain how we got here. The prelude ensures we never forget what here looks like.
Some of what I will tell you is fact, some is not, but it is all true.
Victor's tale begins with a child being quietly starved of affection in a very large house. Del Toro retools Shelley's ideal and happy childhood into something much pricklier and more psychologically loaded. Young Victor is introduced as a boy whose universe orbits almost entirely around his mother Claire, rather than his surgeon aristocratic father, Baron Leopold Frankenstein.
Victor?
Father.
The rest of the time, Mother was mine.
Mia Goth's Claire is warm, engaged, and curious about her son's budding interest in mathematics and science. Charles Dance's Leopold, by contrast, is a frozen monument in his own home, all title and bearing, very little evidence of actual parenting.
I would hear them through the wall. Their voices filled me with fear.
You bear my name, and with it my reputation.
Where Shelley gives Victor doting parents who unwittingly plant the seeds of his later arrogance by never denying him anything, the film gives us a father who never offers him much at all but a rigid education in medicine. The result is a Victor who isn't simply spoiled. He's neglected in a very specific way, materially comfortable, emotionally underfed. It should also be noted that where the Baron marries Elizabeth to take advantage of her dowry in the film, in the novel, Victor's father marries a daughter of his deceased friend to lift her out of poverty. Claire's death in the film is a defining trauma it needs to be for the rest of the story to work. In the novel, Victor's mother dies later of scarlet fever, after Elizabeth, the child the family adopts, falls ill and Claire gets sick while nursing her back to health. Here, Del Toro moves to death earlier and gives it a brutal twist. Claire dies giving birth to Victor's baby brother William.
William grew full of sunshine and smiles. He was all laughter, I was all frowns.
That one change does a lot of thematic heavy lifting. It not only saddles Victor with the knowledge that life and death are intertwined, a baby arrives at the cost of the person he loves most, but also quietly burdens him with the guilt that he didn't possess the knowledge to save her. He is old enough to understand what's happening, old enough to register that his mother is gone because of the process that produced his sibling, and the film underlines this by having him recount the moment he first saw an angel of death reaching out to him. Whether you read this as a literal supernatural visitation or as a traumatized child trying to impose shape on chaos, the point is the same. For Victor, death is not an abstraction, it is a presence, one he believes he can tame.
I had a vision, a dark angel.
Leopold's reaction to this loss compounds the damage. Instead of drawing Victor closer in the wake of Claire's death, he pours what little tenderness he has into William. Where Shelley's text has Victor idolizing his parents and later betraying their values, this film's Victor is already an outsider in his own family, much like the author who wrote him.
You let her die, did you not?
I did everything in my power to save her.
I was born anew that night.
His obsession with conquering death isn't born in a vacuum of enlightenment hubris. It's a child's attempt to fix the one thing that ruined his life, and, not coincidentally, to succeed where he believed his father had failed. The film isn't subtle about this. Victor explicitly frames Claire's death and Leopold's preference for William as the moment his fixation began, but the clarity is part of its project, to make his later crimes feel less like a lab accident and more like the inevitable flowering of unresolved bereavement and resentment.
No, not your hands.
Everything you know, I will know, and more.
When Leopold himself dies and the brothers are split up, the story changes again. William is sent to family in Vienna, Victor is dispatched to Edinburgh to study. In Shelley's version, Victor chooses Ingolstadt and leaves a loving family behind, promising to write and then failing to do so as he vanishes into his experiments. Del Toro's Victor is exiled rather than self-exiled. He's not simply chasing knowledge, he's being shuffled off as part of a tidy solution to a messy, emotional problem. The geographical separation of the brothers doubles as an emotional one. William gets to be the beloved nephew in a cultured Viennese household. Victor gets to become the odd, obsessive student in a damp Scottish city. It's as if the film is saying, of course, this is the man that will one day hide in a tower and wire corpses to lightning. Where else was he ever going to go?
She who was life was now death. I tried to expand the narrow limits of academia.
By the time we meet Victor as an adult in 1855, he's already thrown himself headlong into that path. Instead of the gradual unveiling of his experiments that Shelley gives us, the film drops him straight into a disciplinary tribunal at the Royal College of Medicine. He is hauled before a panel of horrified officials, charged not with merely unorthodox thinking, but with actually reanimating a corpse.
Stop death! Not slow it down, but stop it entirely!
This is one of the film's sharpest deviations from the novel structure. In Shelley, Victor works secretly in his apartment, terrified anyone might learn what he's doing. His crime is private until the creature's rampage makes it public. Here, he's already crossed the line in front of an institution that feels profoundly threatened. The college expels him, declaring his work a slight against science, God, and mankind, which is a deliciously ironic phrase. These men posture as defenders of rational inquiry, yet their outrage reveals a narrower concern. They are less appalled at the ethical implications of Victor's work than the idea that he's broken their rules about what science is allowed to do in polite society.
This is unholy, and obscenity!
This public scandal catches the eye of someone far less squeamish. Arms dealer Heinrich Harlander, played by Christoph Waltz with a silky menace. Harlander is already acquainted with William, now a grown man, who happens to be engaged to his niece Elizabeth, also played by Mia Goth, completing a neat and deeply Freudian casting circle. The film leans hard into this mirroring. The woman Victor loved as a child and the woman he falls for as an adult share a face, turning Elizabeth into a kind of ghostly echo of Claire. It's a choice that doesn't exist in the novel. Shelley's Elizabeth is a cousin-sister figure taken in by his family, not a double of Victor's mother, and it pushes the adaptation into darker psychological territory. When Victor becomes smitten with Elizabeth, he's not just falling for his brother's fiancée, he's chasing a variation on the one person who ever made him feel wanted.
This hardly seems appropriate.
Is anything? And for the very first time, I became more interested in life.
Harlander invites Victor into his orbit, bringing him to his home and proposing something that, to a different man, might sound like a devil's bargain, and to Victor looks disturbingly like an answered prayer. Unlimited resources, a secluded building to turn into a laboratory, and a steady supply of bodies, all in exchange for continued research into reanimation. It should be noted that there's no Harlander analogue in Shelley, but here he embodies 19th century war profiteering and desperation.
An arms merchant.
Or realist.
The film links this patronage to the machinery of war. Instead of Victor sneaking around charnel houses and slaughterhouses as in Shelley, the trio acquire corpses through deals for the bodies of executed criminals and war casualties. Harlander treats bodies the way he treats guns, as commodities.
You're lucky to be hanged. You would have died within the year. It's a strong back. This will do.
And William, eager to help but either oblivious to or willfully blind about the implications, assists Victor and Harlander in constructing the lab.
Don't pretend to be reasonable now. It would be such a shame.
Victor's latest epiphany involves sending electrical currents through the lymphatic system to bring both heart and brain back to life. The detail won't stand up to a modern medical journal, but does two things. First, it makes this science feel more tactile and perverse than in the novel. Second, it foregrounds electricity in the body as an integrated network rather than a crude flip-the-switch cliché. This isn't just a lightning bolt hitting a slab, it's a systemic assault on an entire circulatory system, a rerouting of all those silent, hidden channels that normally carry lymph and immune cells.
There's no spiritual content in tissue and no emotion in a muscle.
The flow of energy through the body follows an Eastern notion called chi.
In the midst of this preparation, Victor's personal life twists itself into a Gothic knot. He reunites with William after years apart and discovers his brother has grown into everything he is not. Charming, socially adept, and warmly embedded in Harlander's circle via his engagement to Elizabeth. Victor's chemistry with Elizabeth is immediate, and from her point of view, unwelcome. She is perfectly aware of his attraction, and perfectly clear in her dismissal.
Are my ideas not clear?
You certainly expressed them loudly enough.
William, cigar and brandy in my study? And you think me a fool?
And to your brandy and cigars.
Crucially, she also dismisses his grand project. His desire to overcome death, which he carries like a holy mission, she treats as an almost childish folly. This is a major tonal departure from Shelley's Elizabeth, who is more passive and adoring, largely kept in the dark about Victor's work. Here, Elizabeth has an opinion, and that opinion is that he's chasing phantoms. Her refusal, both as a romantic partner and as an ideological supporter, deepens Victor's isolation and adds another layer of motive to his obsession.
3 hearts and a fascinating lack of choice.
If he can succeed, he won't just redeem his mother's death, he might finally be proven right to someone who wrote him off as a fantasist.
I have a belief in the marvelous, and so do you.
Believing something does not make it true. I have chosen. Good night.
Del Toro occasionally yanks us out of this increasingly hermetic world to remind us what all of this leads to. In the present-day Arctic frame, the creature hauls itself out of the hole the sailors blasted in the ice and begins walking back toward the ship. The intercutting is effective. While past Victor is collaborating electrodes and waxing fervently about scientific progress, present creature is trudging through lethal cold, a living consequence that refuses to stay buried. The terrified crew watching his return are, in a sense, the Greek chorus of the film, the ordinary people who have to deal with the fallout of Victor's experiment.
You men, perhaps there is a finer point in me telling you my story.
Back in the tower supplied by Harlander, Victor eventually reaches the night he's been building towards.
Hey, Harlander! A storm is coming!
It is, of course, a storm. This is where the movie aligns most closely with the popular image of Frankenstein, lightning arcing across the sky, elaborate machinery humming, a stitched-together body resting on a slab, and simultaneously tweaks it. Before the storm breaks, Harlander drops his own revelation. He's dying of syphilis. The disease, slowly rotting him from the inside, is his motivation for investing in Victor's work.
One night with Venus, a lifetime with Mercury.
With an almost casual entitlement, he asks Victor to put his brain inside the new body to continue living in the creature.
I want to be placed in this new perfect body. No.
I give you everything you asked for, even Elizabeth.
This is not Shelley, and it changes the moral geometry of the experiment dramatically. In the novel, Victor's motives are a mixture of abstract ambition and a vague humanitarian fantasy about banishing disease. Here, that philanthropic gloss is stripped away. The man paying the bills explicitly wants immortality for himself. Victor's refusal, on the grounds that syphilis has already ravaged Harlander's organs and brain, is one of those moments where he almost accidentally does the right thing for the wrong reasons. He's not making a grand ethical stand. He's pointing out that grafting a rotten brain into his carefully constructed body would ruin his experiment.
The disease has spread all inside of you. It's systemic.
Harlander does not take this well. In a fit of frustration, he attempts to sabotage the experiment by stealing a crucial component from the machine, effectively trying to hold Victor's work hostage until he gets what he wants.
I will be the eagle that feasts on your liver.
Please.
The struggle that follows feels small and ugly compared to the elemental forces howling outside, but it's one of the most important scenes in the film. Victor, desperate, grapples with the one man who's both enabled and corrupted his project. In the tussle, Harlander slips. Victor tries to pull him back, but the sleeve rips and the arms dealer plummets, smashing his skull on impact. Shelley's Victor, for all his faults, does not directly kill anyone. His crime is one of omission. He makes the creature and abandons him, then refuses to confess as others are blamed and executed. Del Toro's Victor now has actual blood on his hands before the creature is even alive. Yes, the film frames Harlander's death as an accident, but it's one of those accidents that emerge from a very particular web of choices. Victor accepted this patron, accepted these bodies, accepted this tower, and now the man bankrolling the operation is lying dead at the bottom of the stairs. It's also telling that Victor's first instinct is not to call for help or report the death, but to return to his work. Lightning strikes and the storm delivers exactly the apocalyptic surge he's been waiting for. The machine sparks and the body on the table receives its dose of hijacked heaven. And then, nothing. For Victor, whose entire psyche has been wound around this moment, the apparent failure is intolerable. He is enraged, not grief-stricken or sobered. This, too, is a revealing departure from the classic universal template where Frankenstein is thrilled.
It's alive! It's alive!
And only later horrified by what is made. Del Toro's Victor doesn't even get the mad scientist's victory lap. Exhausted and furious, he goes to bed, leaving the failure on the table, the dead patron tucked away and the storm still raging outside. When Victor finally comes to, he discovers that the universe has had the indecency to cooperate with him after all. The failed experiment he drunkenly went to bed on has, in fact, worked. The creature is alive. Victor wakes to confusion, then awe, then irritation in record time. At first, he's stunned. The thing he'd written off as inert matter is moving, looking at him, responding. For a fleeting moment, his lifelong obsession seems vindicated. He has done the impossible. He has hauled a body back from oblivion. And then, very quickly, the reality of what he's made starts to chafe. Where Shelley's Victor is horrified by his creation's physical ugliness almost immediately, this Victor's disgust takes a different route. The film gives the creature a kind of raw, wounded charisma. It's not his face that bothers Victor first, it's his mind. The newborn being can, at this stage, do little more than fixate on his maker and repeat his name. Victor, over and over, becomes less an expression of connection and more a sonic reminder of responsibility. This is the first major divergence from the novel in this sequence. Shelley's creature vanishes into the night almost immediately after animation, and his education happens off-page to be recounted later in eloquent retrospect. Del Toro keeps the creature in the lab and makes us watch Victor flounder with the fact that a sentient being doesn't spring fully formed from a lightning strike, fluent in Milton and moral philosophy.
Victor.
Yes, this much we have established.
Victor's impatience here is telling. He doesn't want a child to raise or a patient to rehabilitate. He wants a finished product. The creature's limited speech and halting cognition exposed a part of Victor's psyche that was never really interested in life as such, only in the technical feat of generating it. Once that box is ticked, the reality of a dependent, frightened, needy being is an annoyance.
My name is Victor. Is there anything else that you can say? Anything at all? Why? Why would you be afraid of me? I'm not going to hurt you.
The film showcases that annoyance by chaining the creature in the tower's basement, a decision that crystallizes what's changed between the book and film. In Shelley, abandonment takes the form of fleeing the apartment and pretending the whole affair never happened. In the adaptation, it becomes physical imprisonment. Victor doesn't just abandon his creation emotionally, he imprisons him bodily, out of sight, and, he hopes, out of mind.
Why is he chained here?
For his own safety and for mine, and it doesn't know any better.
Yet even in the act of dehumanizing him, Victor can't resist prodding. He notices something extraordinary. The creature's body repairs itself with uncanny speed. The creature cuts its palm with a razor, only for Victor to watch the wound heal almost instantly. This healing factor is a clear departure from Shelley's text, where the creature is sturdier and more resilient than a human, but not containing an almost superhero-like healing factor. Here, the rapid regeneration adds another dimension to Victor's blasphemy. He hasn't simply reanimated dead tissue, he's built something that surpasses human biology, a being whose flesh refuses to obey the normal rules of injury.
The healing is erratic, yes, but exceptional.
On a thematic level, it sharpens the irony of his later failure narrative. How do you look at a self-healing, fully animated organism and call it a failure? Only if your metric of success is not life, but control.
Of all the parts that make that man, which one holds the soul?
Into this already volatile situation walk two people who have no idea how close they are to becoming collateral. William and Elizabeth arrive at the tower expecting a visit with a slightly eccentric relative and his wealthy patron, not an imprisoned giant and a corpse on ice. Victor, still juggling the fallout from Harlander's death, does what Victor always does when reality contradicts his story. He hides it. His ability to compartmentalize, emotionally, ethically, architecturally, is one of the adaptation's running themes.
Elizabeth, my throat makes sound.
Elizabeth.
It's Elizabeth who stumbles onto the truth first. She discovers the creature in the basement and reacts in a way that marks her out as fundamentally different from the men driving the plot. Where Leopold would have seen an abomination and Harlander a resource, Elizabeth responds initially with astonishment, then with a kind of cautious compassion. The creature in turn is captivated by her kindness. The film plays this not as a crude Beauty and the Beast trope, but as the first genuine moment of human warmth the creature has experienced. That's a crucial distinction from the novel, where the creature's early attempts to bond with humans are rebuffed with violence. Here, his first contact with anyone other than Victor is, however briefly, gentle. It plants the seed that he's capable of receiving and returning tenderness, something Victor has conspicuously failed to offer.
In those eyes I saw pain, and what is pain if not evidence of intelligence? Only monsters play God, Baron.
Victor, forced by circumstance to finally acknowledge his achievement in front of someone he actually cares about, drags William into the secret. His brother's reaction is less empathetic than Elizabeth's, more in line with the instinctive fear you'd expect from someone confronted with a stitched-together giant in a dungeon. William's apprehension is important. It shows how quickly the creature's existence, once exposed to the broader social world, becomes morally and physically threatening in other people's eyes. What Victor sees as a project and Elizabeth sees as a bewildering marvel, William sees as a danger.
Harlander. In a fit of rage, he killed him. What's to be done? What's to be done? You must take Elizabeth back to Vienna.
Victor then escalates his lying into something more pernicious. In private, he shows William Harlander's preserved body. Rather than confessing to the desperate scuffle that killed his patron, Victor rewrites the narrative on the spot. The creature, he claims, murdered Harlander in a fit of rage. In Shelley, Victor's worst ethical failure is his silence, his refusal to exonerate Justine, a woman his family took in and cared for when she's framed for William's murder, and his refusal to admit that the deaths of everyone he loved were being done by the creature he created. Del Toro goes a step further. The creature hasn't harmed anyone at this point. Victor just finds it convenient to preemptively scapegoat him. It's a subtle but significant shift. This Victor isn't only negligent, he's actively libelous. He is, quite literally, the author of the monster's bad reputation.
The creature, what's its lifespan, you think?
Brief, very brief, I'm sure.
Branding the experiment as a failure, he tells William to take Elizabeth back to Vienna as he dealt with the creature. The implication is clear. He intends to wipe the slate clean.
Turn the carriage around or I will jump. He's going to kill him.
Elizabeth.
His preferred method of erasure is as unsubtle as everything that led up to it: fire. He leaves the creature chained up in the basement and sets the tower ablaze. There's a cold practicality here that diverges from Shelley's more feverish, guilty Victor. It's a murder attempt cloaked as an accident waiting to happen, but it also harkens to the dream he had of the angel that promised him he would tame death.
Victor! Victor!
But if Victor is emotionally inconsistent, he's not entirely devoid of conscience. No sooner has he left than he has a change of heart and turns back, attempting to undo what he set in motion. This wobble between ruthless self-preservation and pangs of guilt is very much in keeping with Shelley's characterization, but Del Toro changes it in geography and injury. As Victor returns to the tower, just as he reaches the door, the building explodes. The blast is punishment in the bluntest sense. He cannot get close enough to save the creature, he cannot fully detach either, and is maimed for his trouble. The explosion destroys his right leg below the knee, forcing him to live with a prosthetic leg in the present-day Arctic scenes. Where the novel gives Victor an increasingly sickly, wasted body as the physical expression of his moral decay, the film gives him a glaring and mechanical reminder of the night he tried to burn his mistakes. The film then snaps back to the present, closing the loop of Victor's confession. He finishes his story just as the creature, having hauled himself out of the ocean, boards the ship again. This time, his intent is unmistakable. He prepares to attack and kill Captain Anderson, and the logic is depressingly sound. From the creature's perspective, humans are obstacles or threats. This captain is just the latest in a line of men who've pointed guns at him. The prologue has already shown us what he can do when cornered. The crew are paralyzed, weapons and courage suddenly looking flimsy against the reality of a being that can shrug off bullets and heal faster than fire can burn.
Stop! Do not harm him! I'm here!
What stops the slaughter isn't a moral epiphany from the creature, or a courageous stand from Anderson. It's Victor. In a rare moment of clear-eyed acceptance, he pleads with him not to kill the captain, not in the name of abstract justice or Christian mercy, but because he recognizes, finally, that his sins are not transferable. Killing Anderson will not balance the ledger. It will just add another tally to the column of things Victor's work destroyed.
Say one word. Make me save you.
Victor. I called your name and understood I was alone.
This is where the film does something interesting with Shelley's structure. In the novel, Victor dies on Walton's ship, and only then does the creature appear, mourning his death and proclaiming that he will burn himself on a pyre. The Arctic scenes are a coda, a melancholic epilogue. In the novel, the creature also encounters Victor in the mountains and begs him to listen to his tale before deciding whether or not they should continue their fight. Del Toro rearranges this into a three-way confrontation and moves the creature's tale from the halfway point of the book to the final act of his film. When the creature decides to tell Anderson his tale, the film is essentially handing him the narrative baton that Shelley's structure also gives him, but under very different circumstances. He becomes a second storyteller in a kind of moral tribunal at the top of the world.
My maker told his tale. I will tell you mine.
After escaping the tower explosion, the creature does not morph into the rampaging demon Victor is painted. He runs. That's the first telling choice. He flees into the woods, a walking contradiction, stitched together from dead men, but behaving like any other wounded, bewildered animal looking for shelter. In a mordant visual detail, he strips clothing from a dead man he finds, clothing himself in the remains of someone else's life. It's a practical move, he needs warmth, but symbolically it fits the whole notion that he has no identity of his own, so everything he has is scavenged. His first encounters with humans out in the wild are exactly what you'd expect. Hunters, armed and anxious, attack what they don't understand. The film doesn't linger there. The important human contact comes later at a cottage belonging to an old blind man, played by David Bradley, with the exact mix of stubbornness and warmth required to sell this trope one more time. This is the adaptation's version of Shelley's De Lacy sequence, and the parallels are intentional. In the novel, the creature hides in a hovel attached to a cottage and secretly studies a family from a distance, learning language and morality through observation. Here he finds shelter with a single patriarch and his kin, watching the love and mutual care that flows between them.
I long to be part of this family, to be their benefactor.
The spirit of the forest
The creature's recollection of this domestic interlude is flooded with a kind of aching nostalgia. He tells Anderson how he watched them, the small gestures, the shared meals, the casual touch that says you belong here without words. For someone whose entire existence so far has been chains, ice, and fire, this quiet household is an unimaginable abundance. He responds in the only way he can think to, by becoming their secret benefactor. And so he works in the shadows, doing the heavy, unpleasant tasks that they struggle with, returning their kindness without letting them see the hulking stranger in the tree line. That detail is crucial. Victor's story framed him as a failed experiment with a hair-trigger temper. His own story emphasizes labor, gratitude, and, above all, intelligence. Eventually, secrecy becomes untenable. The creature reveals himself to the blind man, which is a direct line back to Shelley. In the novel, De Lacy is blind, and the creature chooses him as the one person who might see past his appearance.
I will be delighted to share what little I have with you.
Friend.
Del Toro simplifies the family unit, but preserves the emotional logic. Sightless, the old man cannot recoil in horror at his scars and height. He responds instead to voice, tone, presence, and the two form a brief but genuine friendship. The blind man teaches the creature to speak and read, but more importantly, he teaches him how to inhabit the world as something other than an intruder, how to sit at a table, how to accept kindness without flinching, how to name what he feels. The film is careful to show that the creature's later eloquence does not spring from thin air. It's a gift, painstakingly passed from one man to another.
Make this your home, and I your friend. The true measure of wisdom, to know you have been harmed, and to let it all fade.
For a brief stretch, the creature's life looks almost like a redemption arc waiting to happen. He knows love and compassion not just as abstract ideals, but as experiences. He learns not only to say words, but to mean them. And because this is Frankenstein, that fragile grace naturally attracts disaster. Where Shelley favors human cruelty, villagers beating and shooting at the creature, Del Toro inserts what looks at first glance like a reprieve, a natural threat that the creature can fight. A pack of wolves descend on the old man and his home. The creature, finally able to use his colossal strength for something other than survival, wades into the fray and brutalizes most of them. It's one of the film's most savage action beats, but underneath the gore is something almost hopeful. For once, his violence is clearly protective. He is defending, not destroying. But it's not enough, as the old man's injuries are too severe. The creature stays with him as he dies, and the film lingers on that vigil. This being, built for endurance and rapid healing, is forced to sit and watch someone else's body obey the old rules. He cannot reanimate him, cannot undo what the wolves have done, and in that powerlessness, we catch a distorted reflection of Victor, who himself is now staring at death. When the old man dies, the creature is left with the corpse of the first person who ever treated him like a friend.
I know what you are, a good man, and you are my friend.
The family arrives and misreads the scene, of course. They return to find their patriarch dead and a monstrous stranger covered in blood. In Shelley, a similar misunderstanding leads to screaming and flight. Here, the reaction is more actively violent. They accuse the creature of killing the blind man, and their grief turns instantly into vengeance. They chase him out and shoot him, multiple times. This is where the adaptation's earlier choice about regenerative physiology pays off in a grim new way. The gunshots don't kill him. They hurt, they shock, but they don't finish him. When he discovers, through miserable trial and error, that he is essentially immortal, the revelation is not a power fantasy, it's a sentence. He's been cast out of the only home he's ever known, framed for the death of the one person he loved, and now he can't even look forward to the oblivion that ends ordinary human grief. Victor wanted to conquer death. His creation is condemned to live with it.
A gift you too had denied me, merciless life.
With all of this happening, the human plotline back in Europe is ticking along with its own brand of melodrama. Victor, injured but alive after the explosion, has been taken in by William and Elizabeth in a run-up to their wedding. It's a domestic tableau that looks almost respectable from the outside. The disgraced scientist rehabilitated by his virtuous family, the couple preparing to start a life together. Underneath, of course, is a nest of lies. There is no Harlander, no tower, no creature in their official story, only a tragedy Victor has carefully edited.
Are you here to thank me? You survived and are intelligent enough to have found me.
Inevitably, the creature finds him. Their confrontation is not an abstract moral debate, it's a reunion between two people whose shared history is written in burns, scars, and missing limbs. The creature confronts his maker, having survived gunshots in a burning building, armed with the knowledge that he cannot easily be destroyed. The immortality Victor accidentally engineered now charges the scene with a new symmetry. One of them can die, one of them will not. In that context, his demand for a companion feels less like a petulant request and more like a desperate attempt to negotiate terms for an existence he never asked for.
The miracle is not that I should speak, but that you would ever listen!
Here the film tracks Shelley quite closely in concept but not in execution. In the novel, the creature demands a female mate and Victor reluctantly agrees, only to destroy her halfway through, fearing a new race. In Del Toro's version, there's no extended ethical wrangling, no half-completed second body. The creature demands, point blank, that Victor make him someone to share eternity with. Victor refuses just as bluntly. He frames his original experiment as a great regret, which is both true and infuriatingly evasive. His refusal, I think, is less about protecting humanity and more about refusing to repeat the one act that has exposed him as frail and culpable. The creature does not take this well. He attacks Victor, and their struggle catches the ear of Elizabeth, who arrives to comfort the creature rather than Victor, which the film stages with almost cruel irony. Victor then reaches for the one solution he always seems to default to when things go beyond his control: violence. He tries to shoot the creature, but hits Elizabeth instead. It's a devastatingly simple version of the novel's most famous murder. Shelley's Elizabeth is strangled by the creature on her wedding night as part of his revenge. In this film, Elizabeth is killed by Victor's bullet. Yes, the creature's attack sparks the moment, but the fatal act comes from the man who spent the whole story insisting he's the civilized one. The gunshot that drops her is as much a narrative bullet as a literal one. It shatters any lingering fantasy that Victor's hands are only metaphorically bloody. Del Toro has quietly been nudging us toward that conclusion. Harlander's death, the fire, the lies, but this is the unambiguous crossing of the line. William arrives with his men in time to walk into a scene that could still, with enough spin, be rewritten, and Victor spins. He accuses the creature of killing Elizabeth, slotting her death neatly into the false narrative he previously concocted about Harlander. Once again, the creature is framed as the murderous brute, and once again, the human audience is tragically susceptible to the story that matches his appearance. William and his men launch themselves at the creature, and all die. You don't pick a fight with an immortal being built out of hardened, self-healing flesh and expect a favorable outcome. William's death is another pointed divergence from Shelley. In the novel, he's a young child strangled in a field by the creature, only for a family friend named Justine to be tried and executed for the deed. Here, William is an adult, and his final words are strikingly different from anything on the page. Before he dies, he tells Victor that he's always been afraid of him, not of the creature, but of Victor. The line lands like a belated diagnosis. It retroactively colors their entire relationship, from Leopold's favoritism to Victor's exile. William is a charming brother, who sensed at some level that there was something deeply wrong with the man they all let build a tower full of corpses. His fear, voiced at the end, is less an accusation than a confirmation. The true engine of all this horror was never the stitched giant, it was the wounded aristocrat with a god complex.
You knew I have created something truly horrible.
Someone.
Meanwhile, the creature does something no one expects. He takes Elizabeth's body and brings her to a cave and stays with her in her final moments, trying to give her a death that is not surrounded by shouting and gunfire. It's a sad echo of his vigil by the blind man's corpse, and the juxtaposition is not accidental. Twice now he sat with a dying human he loved, while the broader human world misreads his presence as inherently violent. In both cases, we see that he's capable of tenderness that his creator never really musters.
My place was never in this world. To be lost and to be found, that is the lifespan of love.
After this catastrophe, the story hurtles toward the Arctic. Victor pursues the creature into the ice, and the film indulges in a grimly comic montage of attempted executions. He shoots him, stabs him, and even resorts to dynamite, because when bullets and blades don't work, why not try industrial explosives? None of it sticks, all of it rebounds onto Victor. Every failed attempt leaves him more battered, more mutilated, more outmatched by the thing he insisted is an abomination. It's a perverse physical illustration of the central irony. The man who wanted to transcend human limits has created something that does exactly that, but in doing so, he's only increased his own fragility.
Kill me now, do it!
You gave me life unwanted. I give that back to you.
These futile assaults are what eventually carry Victor to Anderson's ship. In Shelley, the Arctic chase is austere and elegiac. Here it is downright Sisyphean. The repeated failures underscore the horror of the creature's immortality, while also making Victor's obsession look even more pathetic. He is literally demolishing himself against his own work. By the time both their stories are told in Anderson's cabin, Victor is spent. He knows he's about to die. What's interesting is what the film chooses to do with his last moments. He apologizes, not to Anderson, not to the shades of Claire, William, Elizabeth, or Harlander, but directly to the creature. He apologizes for his cruelty, for the chains, the fire, the lies. For once, he doesn't hide behind the language about regret and mistakes. He owns the moral nature of his actions. And the creature, in a move that pushes the story firmly away from the novel's nihilism, forgives him.
Victor, I forgive you.
That forgiveness is framed in explicitly familial terms. The creature acknowledges Victor as his father. Victor acknowledges the creature as his son. In Shelley, the father-son language is present but poisoned, usually invoked by the creature to highlight the hypocrisy of a creator who refuses to care for what he made. Del Toro opts for something more complicated and arguably more optimistic. The relationship is still tragic, still steeped in abuse, but it is at least named honestly before death comes. Victor dies not alone, but watched over by the very being he tried to murder. What follows is the film's most radical departure from the source material, and arguably its emotional thesis. As morning comes, the creature goes above deck and does something profoundly unmonstrous. He helps. He uses his immense strength to push the ship out of the ice and back onto the open water. This is a thematic inversion. The being the crew initially saw as a threat to their lives becomes the reason they get to go home. The monster is the savior of men. Captain Anderson, moved by the stories he's heard and the spectacle he's just witnessed, abandons his mission. Whatever glory or discovery he once hoped for in the Arctic is now dwarfed by the moral lesson, where obsessive ambition leads. What happens when you treat human lives and bodies as raw material? He promises the crew they're heading home, and they cheer, a small but meaningful gesture that says, in effect, we choose survival and sanity over legend. In Shelley, Walton wavers and turns back partly because his crew mutinies. Here the decision is framed more consciously as a rejection of Victor's path. The final image is the creature standing in the open, facing the rising sun. For the first time, he's not hiding in a basement, a forest, or a burning lab. He stands in full light, unchained, and the camera catches a tear on his cheek. It's a simple, sentimental beat, but there's a lot packed into it. He is technically still immortal and alone. Victor is gone. Elizabeth and the blind man are dead. William and Harlander are long buried. The companion he asked for was never made. And yet, in this moment, he's not framed as a howling outcast. The tear isn't self-pity. It reads more like a complex mix of grief, release, and something that might, if you squint, be hope. This is the point where the film most decisively parts company with the novel. Shelley's creature heads off into the darkness to destroy himself, his existence a closed loop of misery and revenge. Del Toro's creature, however, steps into the sun, having just saved a ship full of men, forgiven his creator, and been listened to, really listened to for the first time. His future is unwritten. The adaptation doesn't pretend he's now fine, or that immortality has suddenly become a gift, but it does allow for the possibility that he can be something other than a cautionary tale. The changes from the book in the final act are therefore not incidental embellishments. They rewrite the moral circuitry. Shelley's ending leaves us with a question. Who was the real monster? Del Toro's ending tweaks that into a different query. Given everything we've just seen, what kind of man or creature do you choose to be next?
This movie, I've been trying to make it since I was a kid. Since my first Super 8s to now, I dreamt of two movies that I thought were the same story, Pinocchio and Frankenstein, and how they were connected, and what it is to be human, what it is to be framed in a life by eternity and death, both forces. And I wanted to make it as personal as it can get.
Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein is less a straight adaptation of Mary Shelley's novel than a passionate discussion with it, and that's exactly why it works so well. On the surface, it's a story we know. A brilliant, egotistical scientist, Victor Frankenstein, defies nature, creates a living being from dead flesh, and sets off a chain of suffering that consumes both creator and creation. But Del Toro stages this as a sweeping Gothic melodrama rather than a conventional horror movie, leaning into big emotions, Catholic guilt, and ruined family dynamics. That shift in tone is what lets the film feel fresh, despite how many times the story's been told. The first thing that lands is the craft. Shot by longtime collaborator Dan Louston, the film is drenched in rich, painterly visuals. Fog-clogged Arctic vistas, candle-lit parlors, surgical theaters, and decaying mansions that look like they've been steeped in mildew and guilt for centuries. Alexander Desplat's score swells and keens in classic Gothic fashion, alternating between intimate strings and operatic choral blasts, and Del Toro's insistence on practical effects gives Jacob Elordi's creature an unnervingly tactile presence under the makeup rather than a glossy CGI sheen.
Every Frankenstein, like every other movie, speaks about its time, and I think we are approaching a threshold with digital technology, AI, virtual realities, in which we have to question ourselves what it is to be human and what it means to preserve and believe that there are larger pieces of work in the universe than us.
You can feel the weight of the prosthetics, the seams and the scars, the strain in the creature's movements. This isn't a digital spectre, but a suffering body put on display. The production design and costumes, heavily influenced by Bernie Wrightson's illustrations and classic Universal and Hammer imagery, place the film squarely in an almost mythic 19th century Europe that feels lived in rather than museum clean. What keeps the film from becoming pure style exercise is the way Del Toro and his cast humanizes both ends of the experiment. Isaac's Victor is explicitly framed by Del Toro himself as the period equivalent of a reckless tech bro, a man whose brilliance is inseparable from his arrogance, convinced that he has the right to re-engineer life itself and is utterly unequipped for the moral fallout. The script underlines his abusive, class-insulated upbringing and his entanglement with Christoph Waltz's arms dealer, turning his quest to cure death into something born of trauma and greed as much as curiosity. Opposite him, Elordi's creature becomes the most emotionally complex figure in the film, a towering, self-healing giant whose first instinct is not murder, but imitation and affection. Del Toro keeps Shelley's key structure, while pushing the creature even further toward tragic victim than vengeful demon.
If the credits of a film were the correct ones, it would read a film by the film. Listen to the film. Listen to everything that goes wrong. And you understand that you're not playing chess. You're surfing. If you lay out the workshop very carefully over 9 months of preparation, when an accident happens, it's not an accident, it's an opportunity. When I was younger, I would say it has to be the way I boarded it. As you get older, you say, let's see if this is the best way, and I listen. I listen to the movie, I listen to the actors, I listen to the cameraman, and then the best solution comes up. And a lot of the things that happened on Frankenstein happened on the day.
The supporting cast flesh out this moral triangle. Mere goth in a dual role that deliberately echoes Victor's mother, and his sister-in-law Elizabeth becomes the emotional fulcrum of the film's questions about love, loyalty, and how much of a person is shaped by the gaze of others. Christoph Waltz's Harlander personifies the industrial rot funding Victor's research, turning the creation myth into a side effect of war profiteering rather than a lone man's folly, and around them Del Toro weaves his usual obsessions: absent or cruel fathers, children forced to carry their elders' sins, bodies as both battleground and icon. It's all recognizably his Frankenstein, even when it's diverging sharply from Shelley's plot. Purists might bristle at how far those divergences go. The film compresses characters. Amidst others, there's no Justine subplot, nor is Henry Clerval present in the film. It also rearranges key deaths in ways that shift a lot more direct blame onto Victor. It also softens some of the creature's more deliberate atrocities and ends not with a self-annihilation, but with a strange tentative image of forgiveness and survival.
Well, fortunately for me, my theme has always been redemption, forgiveness, and letting go, acceptance. Now I'm 61, so I have regret and memory to look forward to. Expect some epics in that regard.
You can fairly argue that this makes the story less brutally symmetrical than the novel. The cycle of revenge is interrupted rather than completed, but that's also where the film finds its own voice. Del Toro isn't simply warning that some knowledge is forbidden, he's more interested in what happens when abused people repeat their abuse, when institutions treat bodies as raw material, and whether genuine remorse can matter after so much harm has been done. Taken as an adaptation then, Frankenstein is true to the spirit of the novel, though not entirely faithful. Taken as a film in its own right, it's a lush, angry, deeply felt piece of Gothic romanticism that uses Shelley's myth as a skeleton. A few stretches in the middle might feel a bit overstuffed to some people, and viewers who want a pure horror experience may be surprised by how unabashedly melodramatic some of the key scenes are, but the performances, the craftsmanship, and the emotional clarity of its central creator-creation relationship more than compensate. In a landscape full of lifeless IP resurrections, Del Toro's Frankenstein feels appropriately ironic, a movie about the dangers of playing God that proves there's still a beating heart in this stitched-together corpse of a story.
There is a different way of talking about a character that speaks to a side of humanity that hasn't been done, and Frankenstein is one of those. You can say, I'm gonna do Frankenstein. Oh, again, as a Latin American dictator, I wanna watch it. I wanna do Frankenstein. Oh yeah, in space. Okay, I wanna watch it. It's multivalent. You can change it with one inflection. That's great mythology. It's completely new. And if you can give emotion to a tale that is 200 years old, that's a great alchemical trick. And I was born to try it.